rain. It was always rain on the worst nights of your life. It wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was a relentless, pounding downpour that turned the city into a smeared watercolor of neon and shadows. My wipers were on their highest setting, fighting a losing battle as I navigated the unfamiliar, winding roads of the old industrial district. My name is Alex, and I was lost. My phone, my lifeline, had died an hour ago. The car charger was faulty, and the GPS had flickered out with a final, pathetic beep. I was relying on memory and a crumpled, damp paper invitation to an art gallery opening that had ended 3 hours ago. A friend's exhibit. I'd promised I'd be there, but a crisis at work had held me up, and now I was paying the price. The buildings here were hulking ghosts of a busier era, brick and rusted steel, their windows dark and gaping. The streetlights were few and far between, casting long, distorted shadows. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but I had no idea where around was. Then I saw it. A light. It was a soft, warm glow emanating from a building that looked like a converted warehouse. A simple, hand-painted sign swung in the wind, creaking ominously. It read, "The Gilded Cage." A bar, thank God. I pulled my beat-up sedan into the gravel lot, the stones crunching loudly under my tires, a sound swallowed by the storm. I took a deep breath, my heart still hammering from the anxiety of being lost. A bar meant people. People meant directions. Maybe even a phone charger. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside. The contrast was jarring. After the chaotic fury of the storm, the interior was preternaturally quiet. It was all dark wood, low, amber lighting, and the soft, mournful sound of a jazz trumpet from a hidden speaker. It was elegant. Too elegant for this part of town. The air smelled of old books, polished brass, and expensive whiskey. There were a handful of patrons, all sitting alone, nursing drinks in high-backed booths. They didn't look up as I entered. A tall, lean man with silver-streaked hair and a impeccably tailored vest stood behind the bar, polishing a glass with a pristine white cloth. He looked up, and his eyes, a pale, almost colorless gray, met mine. He didn't smile. "Rough night," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the hush as I approached the bar, water dripping from my jacket onto the polished floor. "Indeed," he replied, his voice a smooth, low baritone. He set the glass down. "What can I get for you?" "Actually, I'm just lost. My phone died. I was hoping I could use a phone or maybe just get directions back to the highway." His gray eyes appraised me, lingering for a moment too long on my damp, disheveled clothes. A flicker of something, calculation, passed behind them. "The highway's a bit tricky from here," he said slowly. "Spotty cell service, too. But I can draw you a map. Just give me a moment." He turned and disappeared through a swinging door behind the bar, into what I assumed was a kitchen or a stockroom. I leaned against the bar, feeling the weight of the other patrons' silent attention. I tried a friendly smile at a woman in a corner booth, but she quickly looked down into her drink. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, traced a path down my spine. The bartender returned a moment later, but he didn't have a map. Instead, he had a concerned frown. "Apologies. My notepad is in the back. It's just through the kitchen in the storage room. Would you mind? It's on the desk. Help yourself." He gestured to a narrow, arched doorway to the left of the bar that I hadn't noticed before. It was shrouded in deeper shadow. A warning bell, faint but persistent, rang in the back of my mind. Go through the kitchen? It felt off. An invasion of a private space. "It's no trouble," he said, his voice dripping with a false, reassuring warmth. "Straight through, you can't miss it. I'd get it myself, but I can't leave the bar unattended." The logic was flimsy. The bar was practically empty. But the desire to get out of there, to get a map and leave, overrode my caution. My discomfort was just paranoia, I told myself, a product of the storm and being lost. "Okay, thanks," I said, my voice hesitant. I moved toward the dark archway. As I passed the bartender, I caught the faintest scent of his cologne, something sharp and metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. I pushed the door open. It wasn't a kitchen. It was a short, dimly lit hallway, lined with faded, floral-patterned wallpaper that was peeling at the seams. The air was thick with the smell of dust and mildew. The jazz music from the bar was instantly muffled, replaced by the frantic beating of my own heart. At the end of the hallway was a single, heavy-looking door with an old-fashioned, tarnished brass knob. The storage room, I thought. The notepad is in there. I walked forward, the floorboards creaking under my feet. The sense of dread was a physical weight on my shoulders now. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. I should turn back. But I was already at the door. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for the brass knob. It was cold. I took a deep breath, turned it, and pushed the door open. The room on the other side was not a storage room. It was a bedroom. A perfectly preserved, horrifically intimate bedroom from the 1970s. A frilly, lace-covered bed, a dusty vanity with a triptych mirror. And on the wall, staring down at me with a frozen, painted smile, was a portrait of a young woman with vibrant red hair and emerald green eyes. My breath caught in my throat. My blood ran cold. I knew that face. I knew it from the single faded photograph my mother kept locked in a drawer. It was my aunt, Clara, my mother's sister, the one who had disappeared without a trace 30 years ago, the one whose case had gone cold, whose loss had haunted my family, twisting our lives into shapes of grief and suspicion. And, standing in the center of the room, his back to me, was the bartender. He was holding a delicate silver hairbrush, running his fingers slowly through the bristles. He turned around. The polite, neutral mask was gone. "Welcome home, Clara," he whispered, his gray eyes burning with a fanatical light. "I knew you'd come back to me." The door behind me slammed shut with a defining, final thud. I heard the distinct, sickening click of a heavy bolt sliding into place. I wasn't lost anymore. I was in a trap, a carefully laid, decades-in-the-making trap, and the man I had trusted for directions wasn't a bartender. He was my aunt's kidnapper, and I was his new replacement. Time stopped. The world narrowed to this grotesque, frozen moment in this frozen room. The air was thick and still, smelling of lavender sachets and profound decay. The man, the monster, took a step toward me, his hand outstretched as if to touch my face. I stumbled back, my spine connecting hard with the bolted door. A strangled sound, half gasp, half sob, escaped my lips. "I'm not Clara," I choked out, my voice a ragged whisper. "My name is Alex. Clara was my aunt." His head tilted, a gesture of confusion that was somehow more terrifying than his earlier certainty. "Don't be silly, my darling. The years have changed you, aged you, but I'd know you anywhere. The eyes. You have her eyes." He was insane. Not a raving, frothing lunatic, but something far more dangerous. A man whose reality was built on a foundation of delusion, and he was fitting me into it, whether I wanted to be or not. "Look at me," I pleaded, desperation clawing at my throat. "I'm 28. Clara would be in her 50s. I'm not her." "Time is irrelevant here," he said softly, his gaze drifting lovingly around the room. "This is our sanctuary, where nothing ever changes, where you'll never leave me again." He gestured to the vanity. "I've kept everything for you. Your brush, your perfumes. I even found the exact shade of lipstick you loved. Crimson Kiss." He smiled, a tender, intimate smile that made my stomach turn. "We can start over. No more arguments. No more outside influences." My mind was racing, a frantic animal in a cage. Outside influences. That's what my family had been. My grandfather, a stern, no-nonsense man, had forbidden Clara from seeing him. He was older, odd, possessive. They'd had a fight. She'd gone to meet him one last time to end it. She'd never come home. And he had kept her here, in this room, in this living tomb. I had to get out. Now. My eyes darted around, searching for a weapon, an escape. The room had no windows. The only way out was the door I was pressed against. The walls were solid brick under the ugly wallpaper. My phone was dead in my car. I was utterly, completely cut off. "I need to use the bathroom," I blurted out, the oldest trick in the book. His smile didn't falter. "Of course, my dear. It's just through there." He pointed to a small, almost invisible door, cleverly designed to look like part of the wall paneling. "I had it installed just for you, so you'd have every comfort." He was hurting me, containing me. The bathroom would be another locked box within this larger prison. I had to play along. I had to make him believe his fantasy, if only for a moment. I forced my muscles to relax. I unclenched my fists and let my shoulders slump, trying to mimic a posture of resigned acceptance. I looked at the floor, then back at him, letting my gaze soften. It's been a long time, Julian," I said, guessing at his name, praying the desperation in my voice sounded like emotion. His face lit up with a terrifying joy. "You remember." He stepped closer, close enough for me to smell that ozone and metal cologne again. It was the smell of madness. "I knew you would. It's me. It's your Julian." He reached out and tucked a strand of my wet brown hair behind my ear. His fingers were ice cold. I forced myself not to flinch. "The bathroom," I whispered, taking a small step toward the panel door. Yes, of course," he said, beaming. "Take your time. Freshen up. I'll prepare us some tea." He turned and walked back toward the main door, unlocking the bolt with a key from his vest pocket. He slipped out, and I heard the bolt slide home again. He had left me alone, but I was still his prisoner. The moment the door closed, the act dropped. I scrambled to the bathroom door and pulled it open. It was a small, windowless water closet, just a toilet and a sink. No escape, no pipes big enough to crawl through. I was trapped. A wave of pure, undiluted panic threatened to overwhelm me. I gripped the edges of the sink, my head bowed, fighting for breath. "Think, Alex, think." My eyes fell on the hairbrush he'd been holding. It was on the vanity, an antique with a silver handle. It was heavy. It was a weapon. I snatched it up, the cool metal a shock against my palm. But what good was it? I couldn't beat a man to death with a hairbrush. I needed a key. I needed a way to call for help. I started searching the room with a frantic, systematic urgency. I pulled open the drawers of the vanity. They were filled with old makeup, yellowed letters tied with ribbon, and delicate, outdated underwear. It was Clara's life, curated and preserved like a museum exhibit. In the bottom drawer, my fingers brushed against something cold and hard. A small, leather-bound book. A diary. I pulled it out. The front cover was embossed with the initials C.M., Clara Miller. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was elegant, looping. The first entry was dated over 30 years ago. I skimmed the pages, my heart breaking for the young, vibrant woman whose words filled them. She wrote about her dreams of being a painter, her fights with her father, and about Julian. "He loves me so intensely," one entry read. "Sometimes it feels like a cage, but what beautiful gilded bars." The Gilded Cage. The name of the bar wasn't random. It was a monument to his obsession. I flipped toward the end. The entries became darker, more fearful. "He won't accept that it's over. He says if I can't be his, I can't be anyone's. He's talking about a place where we can be together forever, away from everyone. I'm scared. I have to end this tomorrow." The last entry, dated the day she disappeared. I closed the diary, tears stinging my eyes. I was holding the final chapter of my aunt's life in my hands, in the very room where it had likely ended. And I was about to become the next chapter. A new, cold resolve hardened within me. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. For Clara, for my mother, for my family. Julian thought he had brought Clara back. He thought he was in control. But he had made a mistake. He hadn't kidnapped a helpless victim. He had kidnapped her niece, a woman who had spent her life hearing the story of her aunt's disappearance. A woman who knew how to fight. The hairbrush was not my only weapon. I had her diary. And I had the truth. I heard the bolt slide back. The door opened and Julian stood there, holding a tray with 2 delicate china cups. The steam curled up towards his placid, smiling face. "Tea is ready, my love," he said. I slipped the diary into the back of my jeans, under my jacket, and turned to face him, the hairbrush hidden in the sleeve of my coat. I gave him a small, fragile smile. "Thank you, Julian." The game had changed. The prey was now a predator in waiting, and my silent revenge for a 30-year-old crime was about to begin. The tea was bitter, laced with something that made my head feel fuzzy at the edges. I took a few polite sips, then pretended to drink, discreetly tipping the contents into a potted fern that looked like it hadn't seen water in 30 years. Julian watched me with rapt attention, his eyes drinking me in as if I were a miracle. "You always held the cup like that," he murmured, "with your pinky finger, just so." I forced another smile, my face feeling like a cracked mask. Some habits are hard to break. He beamed, taking my words as confirmation of his fantasy. Every second was a tightrope walk over a chasm of madness. I had to be Clara, but I also had to find a way to use his delusion against him. "This room," I began, letting my voice tremble slightly. "It's exactly as I remember, but it feels so closed in. After all this time, I feel dizzy." His expression shifted to immediate concern. "My dear, what's wrong?" "The air is so still," I said, pressing a hand to my forehead, feigning weakness. "I remember. I loved the sound of the rain. Could we go to the bar? Just for a little while? To hear the storm? It would make this feel more real." I was playing a dangerous card. Asking to leave the room could shatter the illusion and trigger his rage. But staying in this sealed tomb meant a certain slow death. I had to get to a space with more variables, more potential weapons, perhaps even another person. His gray eyes searched mine, and for a terrifying moment, I saw the calculating man from the bar re-emerge. Then the devoted lover won out. "Of course," he said softly, taking my hand. His skin was still cold. "Anything for you? But we must be quiet. The others, they don't understand our love. The others, the silent patrons in the bar, were they in on it? Were they captives too? Or just figments of this staged reality?" He led me to the door, unlocking it with his key. The bolt slid back with a sound that was both terrifying and hopeful. We stepped into the short hallway and then back into the main bar. It was exactly as I had left it. The same few patrons in their booths, still not interacting. The jazz still playing. It was like a museum diorama. Were they even real? Or were they mannequins, part of the set dressing for his twisted play? He led me to a plush velvet booth in the corner, away from the others. "Sit, my darling. I'll get you a glass of water." As he moved behind the bar, my eyes scanned the room with new, frantic purpose. The front door. It was only 20 feet away, but it was heavy, and he was between me and it. The windows were covered with heavy, dark drapes. My car keys were in my jacket pocket, but my car was useless if I couldn't get out the door. My gaze fell on a small framed photograph on the wall near the booth. It was a black and white picture of the bar, from decades ago. And standing behind the counter was a younger Julian. And beside him, a woman with vibrant red hair. Clara. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. They looked haunted. She had been here, alive, in this very room. For how long? Julian returned with a crystal glass of water. I took it, my hand trembling. "I saw the picture," I said softly, nodding toward it. "We were so happy here." His eyes grew misty. "The happiest days of my life. Before, before they poisoned you against me." "They're gone now," I whispered, leaning forward, making my voice intimate. "My father, my mother. There's no one left to keep us apart. It was a gamble, telling him my grandparents were dead, but they were, years ago. Of broken hearts, my mother always said." A look of profound relief washed over his face. "Truly, then we are finally free." "We are," I said, my heart hammering. "We don't have to hide in this room anymore, Julian. We could leave, tonight, go somewhere new, just you and me." I was offering him the ultimate fantasy. A fresh start, with no past, no family, no obstacles. I saw the desire ignite in his eyes, a hungry, consuming fire. "Leave," he breathed. "Yes, we could take my car, drive far away from this rain, start over." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. It was like touching a corpse. But we'd need money. For our new life. I was steering him, manipulating the delusion. If I could get him to leave this controlled environment to go to my car, I might have a chance. I could scream. I could drive away. I could crash the car into something. He stared at our joined hands, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was not a smile of joy, but of patronizing amusement. "Oh, my sweet, foolish Clara," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We don't need money. We have everything we need right here. This is our world. I built it for us. Why would we ever leave?" My blood ran cold. The gambit had failed. He didn't want a real life with her. He wanted her preserved in this diorama of his memory. My proposal had broken the spell, reminding him that the outside world existed. His grip on my hand tightened, his fingers like ice-cold talons. "You're testing me," he said, his eyes narrowing. "They've put these ideas in your head again. You need to rest. You need to remember who you are." He stood up, pulling me with him. His strength was shocking. "It's time to go back to the room." "No, Julian, please," I begged, the act crumbling, raw terror taking over. I dug my heels into the floor, but he was too strong. The other patrons didn't move, didn't look. They were statues. As he dragged me back toward the hallway, my free hand flailed, knocking the framed photograph of him and Clara off the wall. It shattered on the floor. He stopped dead. He looked down at the broken glass, at the image of his perfect captured past, now fractured. A low, animalistic growl rumbled in his chest. The loving facade vaporized, replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. "You ungrateful wretch," he snarled, his voice no longer a smooth baritone but a guttural rasp. "After everything I've done for you, after I saved you from them." He yanked me forward, shoving me through the arched doorway and into the hall. I stumbled, falling to my knees. Before I could get up, he was on me, his hands closing around my throat. "I will make you remember," he hissed, his spittle hitting my face. His eyes were black pits of insanity. "I will make you love me again." The world began to dim, spotted with black stars. This was it. This was how Clara died. My hand, scrabbling blindly on the dusty floor, closed around a long, sharp shard of glass from the broken picture frame. With the last of my strength, I drove it into his side. Julian screamed. It wasn't a cry of pain, but of utter, outraged betrayal. The sound was raw and inhuman, echoing in the narrow hallway. His grip on my throat loosened just enough for me to gasp a ragged breath of mildewed air. I scrambled backward, kicking out with my legs, putting distance between us. The shard of glass was still embedded in his side, a dark, spreading stain blooming on his pristine vest. He clutched at it, his face a grotesque mask of confusion and fury. You cut me," he whispered, staring at the blood on his hand as if it were a foreign substance. This was my chance. My only chance. He was wounded, distracted. I had to get to the front door. I surged to my feet and sprinted down the short hall, bursting back into the bar. The few patrons were no longer still. They were standing, their faces etched with, not surprise, but a weary resignation. They were real. And they knew. "Help me!" I screamed, my voice a torn shred of sound. "He's a kidnapper, a murderer. Call the police." But they didn't move. They just watched me with sad, hollow eyes. They were trapped here too. Not by locks and bolts, but by fear, by complicity, by something I didn't have time to understand. I didn't wait. I lunged for the heavy front door, my fingers scrambling for the handle. It was locked. A thick industrial deadbolt, just like the one on the bedroom. "They won't help you, Clara." Julian's voice came from behind me, cold and deadly. He stood at the entrance to the hallway, leaning against the door jamb, one hand pressed to his wound. The blood seeped through his fingers. The other hand held a large, menacing fire poker he must have grabbed from a stand by the fireplace. "They know what happens to those who try to leave," he said, his gaze sweeping over the cowering patrons. They flinched and looked away. He took a step toward me. Then another. The fire poker scraped along the wooden floor, a sound that promised a brutal end. I was cornered. The door was locked. The patrons were useless. He was between me and the hallway back to my prison. My eyes darted around, searching for anything, any way out. The window, the one covered by the heavy drapes. It was a long shot. It could be barred, it could be painted shut, but it was all I had. As he lunged, the fire poker swinging in a wide, brutal arc, I dove to the side. The metal bar whistled past my head, smashing into the wall where I'd been standing, sending splinters of dark wood flying. I hit the ground, rolled, and scrambled toward the draped window. I could hear his ragged breathing, his furious grunts as he came after me. My fingers closed on the thick velvet fabric. I yanked with all my might. The curtain rod, old and rusty, gave way with a shriek of protesting metal. The drapes fell in a heavy, dusty heap, revealing the window underneath. It wasn't barred, but it was a single, small pane of frosted glass, set in a solid wood frame. Julian was on me. He raised the fire poker high above his head, his eyes blazing with homicidal intent. There was no time to find a latch. I curled my hand into a fist, wrapped the sleeve of my jacket around it, and with a scream that was part terror, part fury, I punched through the glass. The world exploded in a cascade of shards. Cold, wet night air and the roar of the storm rushed in. I didn't feel the cuts on my hand. Adrenaline was afire in my veins. I turned just as the fire poker descended. I threw up my arms in a desperate block. The impact was jarring, a numbing shock that traveled up to my shoulders. But I was alive. Behind Julian, I saw one of the patrons, an older man, finally move. He looked at the broken window, at the raging storm outside, and then at Julian's bleeding back. A spark of long-dead courage flickered in his eyes. He picked up a heavy ashtray from a nearby table. "Hey!" the man shouted, his voice cracking. Julian half-turned, distracted. It was all the opening I needed. I shoved him with all my remaining strength. He was off balance, wounded. He stumbled backward, tripping over the fallen drapes. The fire poker clattered from his hand as he fell, his head connecting with the solid oak leg of a bar stool with a sickening, definitive thud. He lay still. Silence descended, broken only by the howling wind and rain pouring through the broken window. The other patrons were frozen, staring at Julian's motionless form. The man with the ashtray slowly lowered it. "Is he?" a woman whispered. I didn't wait to find out. I scrambled through the broken window frame, ignoring the glass teeth that bit into my hands and legs. I fell onto the wet, gravel-strewn ground outside, the cold rain a baptism. My car. I had to get to my car. I ran, my legs weak and trembling, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I fumbled for my keys, unlocked the door, and fell into the driver's seat. I locked the doors, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get the key into the ignition. The engine turned over. The headlights cut through the sheeting rain. I didn't look back at the gilded cage. I just drove. I drove until I saw the lights of a gas station, a beacon of beautiful, mundane normality. I stumbled inside, covered in blood and rain, and the terrified clerk called the police. The rest was a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and frantic questions. They found Julian alive, but unconscious. They found the room. They found Clara's diary in my pocket. They found the remains of a woman buried in a shallow grave behind the warehouse, finally identified after 30 years. The patrons were broken people, runaways, addicts, that Julian had given shelter to in exchange for their silence, their participation in his macabre play. They were victims, too. I never went back. The physical wounds on my hands healed, leaving behind a map of fine, white scars. The psychological wounds, those took longer. Therapy. Nightmares. The feeling of cold fingers on my throat. But I had survived. I had done what my aunt could not. I had escaped the gilded cage, and in doing so, I had given my family the one thing they had been denied for 3 decades. Closure. A funeral. An end to the wondering. My silent revenge wasn't for me. It was for Clara. It was the sound of shattering glass, the roar of a storm, and the truth, finally, screaming into the night after 30 years of silence. Sometimes, revenge isn't about punishment. It's about liberation. It's about breaking the locks, shattering the glass, and setting the truth free, no matter how long it has been held captive. The loudest revenge is the sound of a silence, finally broken. This has been Silent Revenge.